Much better, much better.
Get ready for that. So Rua is was the science coordinator for the South Atlantic Landscape Conservation Cooperative, or LCC, and has coordinated the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy for the last 10 years. Before that, he was the Southeast U.S. Bird Monitoring Coordinator for Partners in Flight. He lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, on Tuscarora and Lumbee lands. And my editorializing, as I've known Rua since 2012, we were both hired as science coordinators by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I worked with him for several years in that role. And when I took that job to become a science coordinator, it was some of the most brilliant people that I had met working in government agencies at that point. Really people at the top of their game in terms of analytical capacity. And then there were other types of people that were really in the community engagement space and really figured out how they could turn these really complicated projects or really complicated concepts into something that multiple different decision makers could interact with. Rua is the transvergence. I don't know if that's a word. He's the combination of those two things. He literally, Rua, I'm straight up saying this, you were the most brilliant person in that science coordinator group, in your ability to take complicated landscape scale and like socio-politically complicated concepts and distill them down into questions and ways that folks could interact with that information and generate products. So I'm exceedingly grateful that you're able to break into your dinner hour and meet some of your new best friends in the North.
Awesome.
Well, thanks. You,
yeah, thanks, Aaron. That was the most glowing introduction I could possibly imagine. But again, this is, I will say that as in the network of science coordinators, when we had the icebreaker to ask, who's your favorite superhero? I'm pretty sure it was Aaron Poe that I called out on that one. No, yeah, it was my favorite. My favorite superhero was Aaron Poe, who that's why I love working, and actually a number of the folks that I see on the call here is because it's kind of like I think Aaron was setting up. While there's a lot of differences between the Southeast and Western Canada and Alaska, there's also a lot of really exciting similarities. And I love stealing ideas for how y'all have been pushing the boundaries on, bringing forward more of the Indigenous voices and doing collaborative conservation and taking some things that work in Alaska. So I love stealing ideas, and so I'm glad to share ideas too. And I love when we're working together on this kind of stuff. So that's awesome. I will share my screen here. Some pictures. Yeah, so there we go. So I'll just share a little bit about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, what we've been up to for a while in the Southeastern US, kind of give you a flavor of that. And then especially near the end, I'll kind of talk a little bit more about potential connections with Alaska and all those other pieces. When we're talking about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, it's a pretty big section of the Southeast. I'm pretty sure that if you took Alaska and the parts of Western Canada you're talking about, they fit roughly in that same area, of like expansiveness and, and probably variation in different and people and, the cultural and natural landscapes that are. So this is the geography for a strategy, and it started started up with a number of the state agencies from the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, all of them, that's kind of SIAFWA, and then bringing along the federal agencies that are part of the Southeast Natural Resource Leaders Group, and they came together. And then fairly recently bringing in some additional folks from a number of nonprofits, Nature Conservancy, Open Space Institute. And they came together really wanting this bigger Southeastern strategy. And the response is the reasoning why is probably fairly similar to some of the reasons that y'all have, right? So in the South, we've got this huge landscape change. Y'all don't have the urbanization at the same level we do, but we're also wrestling with climate change and new ecosystem analogs, water stress, sea level rise, extreme weather, the big changes, but also in a world where it's really hard to get stuff done on your own. It's just, and in order to deal with all these changes, we needed broad and broader collaborations across a bunch of different public, private organizations and ways to kind of get everyone's fingerprint, whether you're a citizen or a little land trust or whatever, kind of an all hands on deck approach to the changes that we're seeing. And the other recognition is that it's really helpful to have some shared goals and priorities to guide where we target actions. This kind of collective impacts idea of, let's all figure out how we can best add up to something bigger than our individual efforts. And it started when the landscape conservation cooperative was starting to gain traction. Self-directed independent partnerships. These 5 were the bigger ones that got things started. And so, we had this system looking holistically at a broader set of natural and cultural resources, thinking about the landscape, land, water, ocean, all these pieces, and breaking them up into these kind of self-governed cooperatives. And the genesis of the Southeast strategy was like, okay, that's all well and good, but we've got folks that are making decisions across the whole state. We have folks that are trying to make decisions across the whole Southeast. And of course, ideally, we want this to add up even bigger. So if you're a federal agency, you're covering multiple cooperatives. If you're a state agency, you've got multiple cooperatives within them. And sometimes you're making decisions at that big scale. And so this is the idea of like, okay, how do we add all this stuff up and help make these kind of shared kind of decisions across a bigger area than just the areas we're slicing up with LCCs. And doing all of it, of course, honoring all the different agencies, different responsibilities, everyone's different authorities, everyone's piece in the puzzle. So what we do in CCAS is we do kind of 3 big things. We set a bold vision and ambitious goal of what we want to do collectively in the South. We design this blueprint for shared conservation actions, and then we clear barriers to this cross-state collaboration. I think the translation in Alaska could be within Alaska collaboration or international collaboration with Canada as well. So, I mean, we know those barriers exist at lots of different scales. So the bigger vision is this connected network of lands and waters supporting thriving fish and wildlife and improved quality of life for people. And the connection part is particularly important for us in the Southeast. We're doing a little bit more reconstruction than y'all are up in Alaska, but the kind of the thriving populations and improved quality of life of people, and thinking about that connected network of lands and waters and having them work together is a key component. So that's the big overarching vision, which is all well and good, but folks also said, yeah, but let's get more specific. What are we doing? How do we know we're succeeding? And that's how it came about, our sort of goal of a 10% or greater improvement in health, function, and connectivity of Southeastern ecosystems by 2060. So we looked into that future and said, okay, well, where are we trying to get? We're doing all this great stuff. We're working together. How do we know we're on track? Where do we know when we're off track? So we have the big overarching long-term goal, but then, and so that was great for the directors and the high-level folks. But then, more of the folks closer to the ground were like, well, I need something I can measure more recently than that. I want to wait till 2060 to find out how I'm doing. So we have these interim metrics related to a 1% improvement every 4 years, and then also an increase in conservation actions within the blueprint every 4 years. So in our shared areas for conservation, we want to be doing more work in those places. Either we're being more efficient or we're just able to bring in more money so we can just do more conservation in the places that we already know are important. Those are great. Both of those are important levers to get stuff done. So that's the goal. And then every year we report on progress towards achieving the goal. We use the existing monitoring systems we have. And so you see breakdown right now. This is the most recent one by health, function, and connectivity. And we have a series of metrics we measure across the Southeast. So green, we're on track. Yellow, we're still increasing, but we're not quite there. Red are the things we're off track. So it gives us a chance to think holistically about the different resources and the network across the Southeast and say, ooh, okay, where are we farthest behind? And so we can use those to kind of try to raise the boats in places that are behind. So we've been doing a lot more work in grassland and prairie ecosystems in particular places, because that's what we've been most off track on for the last few years. So that's kind of the dashboard and how we use the goal. There's much more detail underneath here, breakdowns by states, all this stuff. Wasn't going to show all that in the slides, but this is the kind of quick, what can I cram on a slide dashboard of how we're doing. So that's how we do on progress towards the goal. And then we have our conservation blueprint. This is the version from 2020. And so those darker areas are high conservation value areas. Those are the ones most important for health function and connectivity. And then our medium conservation values are places that got good bones, you need a little bit of love, might require some restoration. They're buffering high value areas, they're important connectivity places. And so collectively, when you add all that up, that is half of the Southeast. And if you just take the high conservation value area, that's 30% of the Southeast. So those are the thresholds we've been using before in the blueprint itself. It's really designed to be about a range of conservation actions. Some of it's economic incentives, some protection, some management. It's more of, where are the places that we need the beneficial outcomes to, not so much of the how exactly we need to get there. It is a work in progress. We're always making improvements. We've been doing some big improvements this year and improving consistency and connections with neighboring regions. So we're always grabbing new data, input, information about on the ground decisions, and it's really designed to be this regional lens. So there's really great local and data and knowledge at all kinds of scales, right? Sometimes it's just a county, or sometimes it's a sub-region, sometimes bigger area. Really the goal here is, bringing that bigger perspective of like, how does this fit into a larger strategy? Telling the story about why certain actions and places are special and kind of amazing. And so it's this regional lens, and we spend a lot of time helping people use it to complement existing data, not to like, okay, forget about that. We've got the perfect thing right here. Here it is. It's like, how do we complement the existing knowledge that we have and the existing information that folks have more locally with something that they don't have? Yeah, so how is it being used? So it's helping more than 250 people from over 100 different organizations. And it's primarily focused on, I would say, two of the biggest aspects of blueprint uses, of those like tons of different uses we have really been focused on two sides of the two angles. One is the better telling your story of place. When you're trying to make a compelling case for conservation action somewhere, especially when you need to do it in a data-driven way too, complementing the information people already have about a place and putting it in a bigger perspective. So for example, you can look at a particular place. We get this sort of a lot as people are proposing projects, and it's like, oh yeah, this place is really important because here are some of the different features. But then stepping back and be like, oh, across the entire Southeast coastal plain, here's how this is a corridor and a hub for this larger network. This is a very special place. This is one of the few unbroken areas of maritime forests across the entire Atlantic coast. These kind of bigger context, you're part of something pieces. So that's for bringing in new dollars. So the more compelling cases we can make that we're working together and that these are data-driven important places, it's more dollars. And then also the other one is partnerships, where we get a lot of different organizations working together. Sometimes this is broad groups of folks, like I'm thinking in some of the coastal plans in areas where we've had the Gullah Geechee community and counties and federal agencies and state agencies and land trusts come together. And when they're trying to identify, hey, where are our priority areas going to be? Where do we need to focus in a place that's of shared importance for all of us? And so we do actually get a lot of uses in different ecosystem partnerships, in different watershed partnerships to kind of help accelerate those. Where are those boundaries and how do we justify those boundaries and tell the story about why they're important? So that's another big use. So what I was going to say with this one is, we got a lot of different users, state, federal, nonprofit, growing group of private and local organizations and different planning organizations. that have used the blueprint in all kinds of different ways. If you have specific questions about one, I'm glad to share that. But we spend a lot of time focused in on kind of helping people use the blueprint, learning what's working and what's not, and feeding that back into the cycle. Yeah, so connections with Alaska. And I love this, like the second time I've been able to use this picture of like me and Lake Clark. And I'm like, oh, that's the perfect connections with Alaska picture. So here are a few things. I didn't go into detail about the different use cases and stuff like that of how it's being used. I'm glad to do that. I thought they might be a little different in Alaska, so I didn't go that deep on those. But I did want to highlight a few things that seemed like similarities with Alaska. I hit the first one already. There's a lot of folks trying to figure out how to deal with climate change and sea level rise in the Southeast, and I assume that's a big thing in Alaska. You know, how do we respond? How do we tell whether we're on track? You know, what are our adaptation strategies? We build a lot of stuff related to climate change and resilience into the blueprint and into our goals. And let's see, next thing, people need data-driven ways to talk about the benefits of their work and how it fits into a larger strategy. I hit that one already as well. And often what we'll find is some of our initial blueprint users start already at the like, I know where I need to work. And sometimes that's great. That's perfect. Really, if you already know where you need to work, it's already captured in the blueprint. Well, we need to figure out how to accelerate those actions. Those are the no-brainer places. And then oftentimes people then, after you've gotten that, after you get to a certain kind of quality of like, yeah, this jives with what I'm thinking about, then we'll have them come back and do pre-screening with the things like the blueprint, where they're like, hey, we got a few parcels we're looking at. Can you help us, you know, take a look at the different benefits of those pieces? So we now have tools, you know, that you can literally just upload your shapefile and get a nice little report that does all your maps, cut and paste for proposals, kind of easy stuff to tell the story of your different parcels or places you're evaluating. But yeah, we found it, and I assume this is in Alaska too. You have to make a case for conservation in different places, whatever that means and whatever those methods are. And so these are great ways of being able to kind of bring a data-driven way, sometimes to things that, you know, you may already know, but it's very helpful to be like, and not only do I think that, but this shared plan and these data say that as well. The other one are related to resource extraction. We have some questions about that. In fact, just got an email related to some of the relicensing for power line right-of-ways and wanting to use some of the blueprint and figuring those out. So we, you know, of course, we have pipelines, we have power lines, we have folks interested in the flip side of the conservation blueprint, which is, you know, okay, where are some better places where are the places that are not going to impact a lot of resources of concern? So, you know, all things being equal, where it might work. So I think there are some questions about that. Same thing with wind energy. We got a lot of wind energy stuff, and solar energy stuff happens. And then the fourth bullet, which I added because I got on like a few minutes early and I was listening to that discussion. We just had a session at the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting about 30 by 30 and what this CCAS approach should be. Had a lot of really good speakers from private industry, indigenous communities, federal, state agencies, nonprofits, you know, kind of thinking about that question. And we've got we're still digesting, you know, the next path forward through the whole governance system. But I think the general theme that was running through it was people were really they were interested in looking at the opportunities. It was sort of like America the Beautiful. Here's a thing coming out of the like federal administration. Hey, we're interested in doing a lot of those similar things. We've gone a little bit deeper than just acreage to conserve, but like, hey, there's some similarities. Let's see if we can take advantage of this opportunity and maybe be even proactive and say, here's what we think this should look like. And if so, cool, we'd love to go do it. There was a great comment from Sarah Parker, probably one of the state directors, who's actually the chair of AFWA right now, in that, and referenced one of the sessions in WAFWA where there were folks being like, let them do that kind of stuff in the Southeast. And she said, well, yeah, if there's money attached and it's what we want to do, you know, I'm paraphrasing, she didn't do that, but you know, so I think we're you're talking about America the Beautiful, and, from a partnership perspective of a broader group of people. And, we're thinking about that as well. Like, what's the best approach to take advantage of that opportunity and move what the greater partnership wants to do forward from the ground up. So that's another similarity. And then the last thing I have real quick is just some thoughts from the early days of formation and CCAST, because Aaron wanted me to hit on a few things about just like thoughts earlier on as we were deciding to do all this stuff. And so I got a few quick thoughts and lessons learned on it. The first one is that pretty much with everything, we've taken this kind of lean startup approach, which started in a lot of tech startups, and generally the approach of not taking 5 years to get a product perfect, but really trying to figure out, okay, how do we get the kind of minimum viable product that can get used by some people? And then really plan for, how do you keep making it better? How do you learn? How do you make it more usable? How do you make it better? And so pretty much everything from the conservation blueprint to setting the goal to the goal reports have been on a pretty regular kind of pattern of every year, kind of like deciding we're going to do it, figuring out how to do that, not taking more than a year to figure all that out until we have our first version, and then documenting why it's not perfect, and then working on that for the next year, and then kind of iterating in this collaborative cycle of working with the users and prioritizing what we fix based on how people are using it and what is most important. So that general approach for all our products is, we've tried to get it just enough that it can start being usable and then learn from there. And that way it gets better faster. And you don't spend 3 years trying to tweak some knob that really wasn't so important after all. The other thing that we've done that I feel like has worked really well is that although there's this kind of high level top governance, of a smaller set of organizations, we've really tried to work with the bigger conservation community I think about it as a giant brain trust, right? Not really, how do we benefit from the amazing knowledge of so many different people, their personal experience in places, without taking too much of their time. So the blueprint, for example, has more than 1,700 people from like more than 500 organizations that have their fingerprints somewhere on it. And I don't mean they listen to a talk, because I don't count listening to a talk. I mean, cool, yeah, listening to a talk is nice. But like, were you in the decision process somewhere? Did you get to vote like we did on our last workshops on our updated approach to corridors and how we do it? Did you get to like put in your chips and talk with people and then discuss how should the blueprint deal with urban growth and sea level rise? Like your fingerprint, did you decide whether an indicator was good enough to move forward? And that's the bigger tent. So we try to do as much as possible on the products and the pieces at the really big tent of anyone and everyone that wants to be part of some of these things. And so that approach, I think, without taking too much time, if you got an hour in your interest, I don't care if you're a grad student or a state agency director or, any one of the tons of, a farmer, a private citizen, whatever, we want to try to find a path that uses your time really efficiently, but also can help everyone benefit from the amazing kind of experience that you all have. And then third thing is about ease of use for our products. So one of the things we found early on, just kind of seeing what tools were out there and how well they're being used by people, is that we just spend so much time in the conservation world trying to get all the technical details right, of just like the GIS and the models and all this other stuff for tools that are supposed to be used by a lot of people. And, we spend almost no time on the working with the users and testing things out and seeing what works and what doesn't. And it's stupid stuff sometimes about like, not stupid from the user, but just like stupid stuff you don't think about, like, oh, I couldn't actually get to the tool from the website because I didn't understand where that link was. Like, even little things, we just put so much, and so we tried to put a lot of effort into working with users, testing things out, helping people use this stuff. One way to make something easy to use is to have a staff person that can work with you, and you're like, oh, how do I put this stuff together? Yeah, glad to like help do that for you. And that's a lot of those uses. We know about a lot of these uses because there are people reaching out to us. We don't know about a lot of the uses where people don't reach out to us, but it's really helpful. I mean, it's like, imagine if you spent all your time designing a phone like this and you made this amazing camera that was like the best camera out there, but it was super hard to take pictures. No one's going to buy that phone. You know, it's the best camera out there, but like maybe 10 people will buy that phone. But like most people actually need to take those pictures quickly and easily. It doesn't need to be the best, most perfect, amazing thing. So anyways, focusing, not leaving the working with the users and making the actual information easy to use. We try to focus a lot on that piece. And then the last piece I had, because Aaron asked about the connection to the ocean and the marine environment. And it was really relatively easy in the South from the beginning with the South Atlantic LCC, because in the formation of the cooperative, one of the forming members was the coordinator of the Fishery Management Council. You know, and so with the broad support of everyone else forming the LCC, they recognize that this is the great chance to bring in the lands and the waters all the way out to the open ocean, because all these different species and cultures, they don't draw this magical line on the coast. You know, there are things that keep crossing that boundary, and we're trying to do transboundary conservation here. So they recognize that value and how those are independent systems. And so that's where we kind of, it was kind of like a no-brainer. It wasn't even until later, as new steering committee members had come on, that people are like, you know, should we be doing the ocean? And everyone's like, of course. What are you, crazy? It's like, yeah. So anyways, that was just kind of a no-brainer from the beginning, from the group, on, especially on the Atlantic side. The Gulf side will probably be bringing in farther into the ocean in a year or so. But that was more sensitive because of all the energy interests that were in there and everything that was happening with Gulf restoration. So that was politically, folks said, hey, let that cool down for a few years politically. And so now we're hearing from the ocean collaborative organizations that are like, okay, yeah, let's fold that piece in. So we have Florida, but we go all the way out 200 miles out into the EEZ. And I see a future where we're going international in the ocean, because that's our connection to the Caribbean, through the Caribbean nations and through species and currents and climate change and all those other things. So yeah, ocean's always been a no-brainer. And there are questions about it, but then most folks kind of saw the value and said, yeah, this is what we're doing. We're transboundary. Nothing magically stops on the coast. Yeah, so that's what I have. Hopefully I didn't take too long, but that was my relatively fast version.
That's excellent. Thank you, sir. And I do think we have some time for questions, as I'm sure there would be some. So folks, either throw them in the chat or, you know, unmute yourself and raise a hand, however you want to. Oops, I saw a hand raised. Oh, there we go. Hey, Matt, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rua. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about the goals part of the blueprint and the whole project, because you mentioned health, function, and connectivity. And it seemed like under the health, there were like maybe acres of particular habitats that are of interest. And I wasn't sure what birds means, whether that's diversity or abundance, but it just seems like that really represents the conservation paradigm of the group. And it's probably very complicated to come up with what these metrics are going to be.
Yeah, this actually wasn't too bad. I would say, I think one of the things that helps, at least in this approach, is that at least at the scale of the Southeast, maybe there's even better monitoring in Alaska. You know, building off existing monitoring that can get you trends that you can report on really shrinks the universe of what you can use super fast. on pieces. So like, for example, and again, depending on the particular birds we're talking about. So like the upland forest birds and the pine and prairie birds, that's based on breeding bird survey and regional species of greatest conservation need. So these are kind of the, like within those, we took those kind of regional species of interest, and then it's breeding bird survey trends, just looking at kind of where they're going over the last kind of recent time horizon. So that's existing information. Beach birds is the International Shorebird Survey, where we look at trends just using some of those. Yeah, some of them are remotely sensed, like forested wetland area. Coastal condition is the EPA Coastal Condition Index, based on those sampling, which I think that covers Alaska too. I can't remember. That's one I haven't looked at. But yeah, it's because we're building off of stuff that's already out there and monitored, it really narrows the universe. It still takes a little time thinking of how do you best incorporate it. But it also helps us move a lot faster and helps stop. I mean, one of the things I've seen a lot that stops people from measuring progress on their goals is they start from what's the perfect set of metrics we could use. And then they really get stuck over the next few years trying to track progress on their goals with the perfect metrics, and then end up doing nothing other than scoping out the perfect I mean, not, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like you can get really stuck in the mud if you figure out what you want in an ideal world, and you can move a lot faster if you take what you already have and you can monitor and think about, okay, does this fit into helping us, track progress towards our goal, admitting that's not perfect. And it can help frame discussions about, justifying gaps that you need to help fill too. But another thing related to this that's kind of the sneaky collaborative underpinning of why we're trying to build off existing collaborative efforts is that we also are trying to point out these collaborative multi-organization partnership related monitoring things like the breeding bird survey, as things that everyone can be part of. So if someone's like, oh, we don't really have very good information in one place, well, here's something we might be able to do about it. Maybe we can. Maybe I'll want to go take on that breeding bird survey route. The shorebird survey is a good example where I just had one of our folks from the Army Corps that was saying like, I wish that this, we do so much work on beach restoration and all these other things. I wish we had less uncertainty and we could do more with the beach birds, and then I looked at the International Shorebird Survey and it was like, oh, all those places where the Army Corps has monitoring on aren't captured in the Shorebird Survey. And they're like, yeah, we can tell our contractors, like we're interested in modifying our protocols, or using these protocols or telling our contractors to use that protocols. So it could go into the Shorebird Survey so we can get better information about how things are going with beach birds. So it does also kind of like try to maximize the use of what we have. But if there are some key gaps that we could fill, instead of starting something new, maybe we can just help fill in what we have. Is that what you're getting at, Matt?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. That helps.
Cool.
Thanks, Rua, and thanks, Matt. Other questions that folks have for Rua? Raise your hand or unmute yourself or any of the above. Use the chat. Can I ask you one?
Are we allowed to ask him questions?
I'm gonna say yes to myself. Yes, Shelley, you may do that. Well, in part because I'm a planner, Rua, and so as well as a facilitator for meetings like this. But so I get excited about all of this, especially your comment and your response to Matt related to the data piece, where you can spin circles for years trying to find the perfect data points and targets and such, and takes lots of agreement. And then while you're doing that, the data changes and blah, blah, blah. So all of that, but actually that does kind of tie to my question that I put in the chat earlier about, I'm really curious about the composition of the private partners that you have there. And that whole pie chart is super impressive with the diversity of partners, as Aaron mentioned. And my eyeballs went right to the private piece, which is usually kind of like the missing players on the scene. So it's exciting to see that. Would love to know what those folks are composed of. And I think that relates to like this idea that you don't have to have the perfect data points, because you will lose private sector partners if you're just doing data collection and planning things. They're like, where's the thing? What are we getting done? So anyway, that was a really long question, but.
Yeah, so I'd have to actually look up exactly who all those 12 are, but we do have a database, so I can look up exactly who those 12 are, but I can tell you some of them because I know some.
Yeah.
Of them.
Yeah.
So it's a mix. Some of them being consultants. A few examples that immediately come to mind, just pulling them off. One relates to some of the forest products industry, and we have a few related to the forest products industry, and they're really interested in a few different things. You know, one of them being, you know, identifying places to put new facilities. Where do we source? So this idea, okay, we're going to be building new facilities. We're going to be sourcing wood from these different areas. You know, where are the best places for us to do that? And then also, where are the best places where we can do some good? You know, like kind of they had this sort of like this, you know, the classic red, yellow, green kind of areas. Like, what are those red areas we really need to get away from? What are the yellow areas where maybe the impact wouldn't be so good? And what are the green areas where it's like, you know, we have a lot of systems in the Southeast that used to be very open and are very, you probably don't get National Geographic, but there's actually going to be a National Geographic article with the new map of grasslands probably in the beginning of next year, probably around February or something. And will surprise a lot of people in seeing just how much of the Southeast used to be tree savanna and more open instead of dense trees. Like, actually probably could argue most of the country. So, you know, there are some good places where some of their work can be helpful. So they're really interested in that component. So we get a lot of the forest products, mitigation banks, you know, about mitigation and where to do some of those pieces, and had some discussions. I don't know where we're at with some of the power companies, but they're part of, again, the sort of similar things. There's infrastructure, how can we best manage these? And there's also the positive side of those pieces. So those are that come to mind. I have to look up all the different private ones. We have this good problem now where at the very beginning, like I could tell you every single one of our users, we only had, you know, 2 user support staff and me were the only people helping out. And now it's like we get multiple new uses a week. And so like when I go in and check on them, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think, you know, private industry, there's been some growing interest, especially forest products and a little bit in the energy side of things. I do think usually if there's intersections with other industry, it's through the uses are more through a kind of a third party. So if it's a Google or an Amazon or some pieces, I know we are working in part of Florida with a really cool collaboration of folks that are looking at this sort of connected rural recreation economy across a number of municipalities. And so it's amazing. So we help that partnership surface some of the kind of important natural assets and corridors and tell some of the stories of those. But that's one in which one of their big targets is kind of trying to figure out how to bring in compatible industry and help them be good citizens when they come in. So build up that recreational economy, but build out the recreation around not just their natural assets, but some of their historic and cultural assets too. So this is like some of the North Star communities where some of the original, more basically sort of self-directed slave communities lived. And so there's some amazing stories about some of the history that you really don't get to hear very much. And so they're really trying to build this regional recreation economy around the natural assets and the historic story of some of the places, and trying to build in kind of compatible small business opportunities that are anchored around that. So you're sort of blending in the, you know, the history and the actual town, you know, bringing in some of the plants, bringing in stories and then transitioning it into the natural areas piece. And so that has a different intersection to, but there are some of the community development organizations that are part of that as well. So it's not direct private industry use, but it is kind of a direction we've been going more with some of the different communities.
Great, thank you. So we're at 2:17 Alaska time, and Rua, I just wanted to respect your time. And I think knowing that you have other things going on, would you be open to one more question maybe from folks?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And so looking out there, I know, Aaron, you may have one primed, also looking for the rest of our good friends that have joined us.
I say somebody else should ask a question though, not me.
I know. And I wonder, Matt, did you have a question? Because I saw you unmute yourself.
I was hoping that somebody else would jump in, so I didn't have to ask 2 questions, but I'll ask another one. So Rua, I was just curious, what percentage of your users are actually like more interested in some of the like base layers and, you know, not the kind of synthetic end products, but individual conservation data layers?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people that are interested in both, you know, the different pieces. We bring them together. So as we're doing sort of a report, but the approach we've taken, which I think is different from some other land planning pieces, is that our ultimate goal is to kind of facilitate this connected network and people working together. So we certainly let people use stuff individually, you know, if you just want to use it on your own, the underlying inputs. But the concept behind doing these kind of shared plans and strategies is that we really want to help people align around a shared plan. So we try to, you know, as much as possible, trying to think about an exact word to say, but in general, we could just use individual layers. But if we just use individual layers, we don't have a shared plan anymore. You know, then everyone has their own shared tailored plan. You know, I think the ideas that we're trying to do is help people not go off and they're completely in their own silo, but see where the co-benefits could be. And that's part of the larger design places. So, so we don't count something as a blueprint use unless they actually use the blueprint in some way. The combination of all those. We don't track the people that just end up using the underlying data layers, because that's something that, again, thinking about the niche and the power of the partnership, you know, developing a data layer, which most of the data layers we don't develop ourselves. We try to build on existing ongoing efforts that are already going on, and they're already going on. So we don't focus so much on the individual layers, because you can do that through a project. Often you can do that through like different folks develop those pieces. We really try to kind of help people use them collectively. And we don't count it as a blueprint use if you're not using, you know, the corridors or the priorities at some level. You know, they'll use all the other stuff too, you know, the stories about it. But if you're not using something that could only happen because of the blueprint, totally fine. But we don't count it as a blueprint use in this context.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thing real quick related to that is we also, because we work so much with the various data providers on this, one of the things we can give back that I think folks, especially that work on national programs, really love is being able to go back to folks that work on the National Coastal Condition Assessment and be like, hey, here's some stories about how your stuff is getting used as part of the blueprint. Hey, NOAA, hey, TNC, hey. So that's a really cool back and forth collaborative thing, because, you know, the data developers that work on these national and regional data sets for us work with us to help get us data, make sure it will work for the blueprint. And then we can give back to the researchers something that they almost never get to hear, which is like, you know, hey, as part of using the blueprint, here's how some folks have been using, here's how we've been using this and this, and here's how people have been using that too, which is also pretty fun.
Thanks, Rua. Aaron, did you have one final question before we
Really
take
quick
a
one,
break?
maybe,
Yeah.
Rua, I know you've mentioned it before in a previous conversation, and actually was just talking with folks in Florida yesterday, but about some of this kind of like social impact analysis or sort of like environmental justice type applications of the blueprint. And I was wondering if you could just say a couple of quick to kind of daylight some of those opportunities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been, and we had in parts of the blueprint for a few years and have been figuring out how to best think about the dimensions of equity in the larger blueprint design. So, I think there's definitely some historic problems even in some of the underlying data sets, like the National Register of Historic Places is very much, it has a number of different historic places, but it's very heavily weighted towards historic places of a very certain group of people with a certain amount of money from a certain background. And I think there's other components we've been thinking about in the network of how do you make sure that this is, if you're thinking about this larger network, that the benefits are equitably distributed across the wider group of different folks. And so one of the indicators that we used in part of the Southeast Blueprint last year, and we will be using, unless something goes wrong, we will likely be using this coming year, is an equitable access to potential parks indicator. And so in this case, this is kind of an evolution of some of our urban open space and various other pieces where we're looking at, okay, where are the most socially vulnerable communities that don't have easy access to parks and nature nearby, and then raising those up. So the way we work in the blueprint with all these indicators is it's kind of we want to capture high value representation of all these things. These are important components. How do you design a network that accommodates all these pieces? And so that's one example of some of the things we've been working on improving in this piece. So, we want to make sure that equitable access to nature in places that aren't parks right now, but could be, that's part of that connected network, because it really is a natural and socially connected network piece. So we got a long way to go. We've got folks, we're part of the team that helped with the original, and now we're kind of evolving into the next one. And yeah, that's a long way to go, but we're trying.
Thanks, Rua.